Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Interarbor Solutions, and you're listening to BriefingsDirect. How businesses perform has always depended on how well their employees perform. Yet never before has the relationship been so complex between how well employees work and the digital technology that they use. At the same time, companies are now grappling with the transition to increasingly data-driven and automated processes. What's more, the top skills at all levels are increasingly harder to find and hold on to for supporting the latest forms of strategic business agility. As a result, business leaders must enhance and optimize today's employee experience so that they in turn can optimize the customer experience and by extension support the success of the overall business. Stay with us now as we explore how those writing the next chapters of human resources and information technology interactions are finding common ground to significantly improve the modern employee experience. I'm pleased to be joined by two leaders in this area who will now share their thoughts on how intelligent workspace solutions are transforming work and heightening worker satisfaction. We're joined now by Art Mazer. He's the Principal and Global Human Resources Transformation Practice Leader at Deloitte. Welcome, Art.
Thanks so much, Dana. Great to be here.
We're glad to have you with us. Tim Minahan joins us. He's Executive Vice President of Strategy and Chief Marketing Officer at Citrix. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks, Dana. Always a pleasure.
Art, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you. Why is there now more of a direct connection between employee experience and the overall business success?
Yeah, I love that, Dana. It's a great lead off to your point. And I think what's fascinating is there's been a really long-standing sense on the part of leaders, I think intuitively knowing there must be a linkage. I mean, for a long, long time, people have said happy employees equal happy customers, right? It's just kind of almost become understood. But now what's, I think, really powerful is we have true evidence that demonstrates the linkage. For example, in our Deloitte Global Human Capital Trends Report 2019, it's the 9th year running, we have noticed a very important finding in this regard. Purpose-focused companies have found that they have outperformed their S&P 500 peers by a factor of 8. And when you think about, well, how do you get to purpose for people working in sort of an organization, it's about creating that strong experience. And what's more, I was really intrigued when MIT recently published a study that demonstrated the direct linkage between positive employee experience and business performance. They showed that those with really strong employee experience had twice the innovation, double the satisfaction of customers, and 25% greater profitability. So, those kind of statistics would tell me pretty clearly that it matters and it's driving business results.
It almost sounds like it's common sense and an inevitable outcome when employees and their experience affects the business. But I can reflect on my own experience that companies will talk the talk but not always walk the walk unless they're forced to. And I think maybe that's what's going on. Do you sense that, Art, that there's some pressures now that hadn't really been there before?
Yeah, I think there is. And, I think some of those pressures appropriately are coming from the market. Customers have a very high bar with which they measure their experience with an organization. And we know that if the employee or workforce experience is not up to par, then the customers will feel it. And so I think that demand, that pressure you described, is coming both from customers who have louder voices now than ever before. They've got the power of social media and the ability to make their voices known and their perspectives heard. And there's a tremendous amount of competition for a variety of customers. And as a result, I think leaders, to your point, really recognizing that they've got to get this right and they've got to get their workers in a place where those workers feel like they can be highly productive and in service of customer outcomes.
Dana, I would fully agree with what Art's saying there. In addition, I think there is an added pressure going on in the market today, and that is the fact that there is a huge talent crunch. Globally, McKinsey estimates that there is a shortage of 95 million medium to high skilled workers. We're beginning to see, even forward thinking or forward digital companies like Amazon saying, hey, look, we can't go out and hire everyone we need, certainly not in one location. So that's why you have HQ2 and the like. But even just last week, they committed to investing over $700 million to retrain a third of their workforce with the skills that they need to continue to advance. And this is part of that pressure that companies are feeling. Hey, we need to drive growth. We need to digitize our business. We need to provide a greater customer experience. but we need these new skills to do it, and there's just not enough talent on the market. So companies are rethinking that whole employee engagement model to try to advance.
Now, Tim, the whole concept of employee experience seems like it was largely in the domain of people like Art and those that he supports in the marketplace, the human resources, the human capital management people. Why does IT have more of a role in this now than before? And why do you think that IT leaders and HR leaders need to be a bit more attached at the hip?
That is a great question, Dana, and it's one for these times. So much of what chief human resources officers and chief people officers have done to really advance the culture and then even the physical environment within which employees work, to attract the right talent, to retain talent, has gone extremely far, improving benefits, ensuring there's a purpose, ensuring that the work environment is very pleasurable. However, one of the key things, we just conducted a study together with The Economist, a global study into employee experience and how companies are prioritizing it. And one of the things that we found was that one of the things that organizations have missed out on is they've neglected to take a look at the tools and the access to information that they give their employees to get their job done. And that seems to be a big gap. It actually was reaffirmed with the Global Gallup study not too long ago, where right behind the manager, the number one indicator of employee engagement was, do they feel they have the right access to the information and tools they need to do their best job? So technology, that digital workspace, if you will, is playing a increasingly important role, particularly in the fact of how we work today. Right? We don't always work at a desk or in a physical environment. In fact, most of us work in multiple locations throughout the day. And so our digital workspace needs to travel with us, and it needs to simplify our day, not make it more complex.
Art, as part of the study that Tim just cited, ease of access to information required to get work done was one of the top things that people identified as being part of a world-class employee experience. And it doesn't surprise me, because we're asking people to be more data-driven, but we have to think about how we give them that data and how they can use it. Are you seeing people thinking more about the technology and the experience of using and accessing technology when it comes to HR challenges and improvement?
Yeah, for sure. And in the HR function for so many years, technology has been front and center. In fact, I think HR executives and their teams and the workers that they serve have been at a bit of an advantage in the last couple of years, in that technology investments have been quite rich in the HR space, right? One of the very first areas to be moved into the cloud. And that's created lots of opportunities beyond those that may have been available even just a few short years ago. And to your point, though, I think, in building on Tim's comment, I think it goes well beyond the traditional HR technologies and is focused around areas like collaboration, knowledge sharing, interaction, and goes into tool sets that foster those kinds of necessities that are at the heart of being able to drive the work in the way that work needs to get done today. The days of traditional hierarchies where your manager tells you what to do and you go do it are quickly dwindling. Now, sure, we've all got leaders and they tell us to do things, and that's important. I don't mean to take away from that. But yet we're moving in a world where, in order to act with speed, teams are forming in a more agile way. Networked groups are operating together cross-functionally and across businesses, geographies, and it's demanding, to your point, a new tool set. Now, fortunately, there's a lot of tools that are out there for that. I think, like with any new area of innovation, though, whether it be the HR leaders, the IT leaders, business leaders, and the workers themselves, it can be a bit overwhelming because there are just so many technologies at the moment coming into the marketplace to take advantage of. So the trick we're finding is for organizations to be able to separate the noise from the impactful technologies and create a suite of tools that's easy to navigate and removes that kind of friction from the workplace.
Yeah, Tim, just throwing a fire hose of technology at the problem is certainly not the not the way to go. From the survey, we heard that making applications simple, a consumer-like user experience, and the ability to work from anywhere are all important. Tell us a little bit about how you get that right balance between the use of technology, but simplified and perhaps automated.
No, I think Art hit the exact right word. All this choice and access to technology that we use to get our jobs done has actually created a lot more complexity. Right? The typical employee now uses about a dozen or more apps throughout the day, oftentimes need to navigate 4 or more applications just to get a single task or a bit of information that they're looking for. And as a result, they need to navigate a whole bunch of different environments, remember a whole bunch of different usernames and passwords, and it's really creating noise in their day. And to Art's point, there's an emergence of a new category of technology, a digital workspace, that really unifies everything for an employee, giving them single sign-on access to everything they need to be productive in one unified experience. So they don't need to have as much noise in their day. Certainly provides an added layer of security around things. And then the third component that gets very, very exciting is that forward-thinking companies are beginning to infuse things like machine learning and simplified workflows or micro apps that connect some of these technologies together so that the employee can be guided through their day, very much like they are in their personal lives, where Facebook might guide you and curate your day for the news and social interactions you want. Netflix will make up the recommendations based on your historical behaviors and preferences, and that's beginning to work its way into the workplace. And so the study we just did with The Economist clearly points to bringing that consumer-like experience into the workplace is a priority among IT and HR leaders.
Art, you said that a positive employee experience requires removing friction from work. What did you mean by friction, and is that related to this technology issue, or is it something bigger?
I love that you're asking that, Dana. I mean, I think it is something bigger than technology, yet technology plays a massively important role. You know, when we think about friction, just what I love about that word in this context is that it's a plain English word. We know that friction means that we're causing something to slow down. And so it's bigger than just technology in the sense that to create that positive worker experience, we need to start really thinking about a broader construct, which is the human experience overall. And elevating that human experience is about first and foremost recognizing that everyone wakes up every morning as a human. We might play the role of worker, we might play the role of customer or some other role, but in our day-to-day life, anything that slows us down from being as productive as possible is, in my view, the element that is friction. So that could be process-oriented. It could be policy and bureaucracy that's getting in the way. It could be managers who may be struggling with empowerment of their teams. It might even be technology, to your point, that causes it to be more difficult to, as Tim was, rightly saying, navigate through to all those different apps or tools. And so this idea of friction and removing it is really about enabling that workforce to be focused myopically on delivering on results, those results for customers, for the business, for the other workers of the enterprise, whatever it may be. And anything that stands in the way should be evaluated as a potential cause of friction. Sometimes that friction is good friction in the sense of slowing things down for purposes like compliance or risk management. In other cases, it's bad friction that's just getting in the way of getting good results.
I love what Art's talking about there. And I think that is kind of the next wave we'll see in technology when we talk about these digital workspaces, moving from, rightfully so, traditionally enterprise applications were built around given functions, and even the more modern collaboration tools are focused based on team-based collaboration. Yet an individual, a person, a human, needs to navigate all of these environments and oftentimes work in different ways in order to comply with how a given tool that they have at their fingertips requires them to work. And so this idea of people-centric computing, in which you put the person at the center, you make it easy for them to interact with all of these different channels and remove some of the noise from their day so they can do much more meaningful work, or in some cases, as one person put it to me, to get the job done that I was hired to do, is I really believe where we're going with this. And you've seen it sort of in consumer technologies. The web came about to organize the world's information, and apps came about to organize the web. And now you have this idea of the workspace coming about to really kind of organize all of those apps so that we can really get all the utility that they had promised.
If we return to our concept of the North Star, the guiding principle in this all is the customer experience, how do we make a connection again between solidifying that customer experience and how it interacts with processes and a company and a culture, and then that employee experience. It seems to me that it's very likely and a big risk that employees will focus on their experience but not factor in the customer experience. How does this happen, Art? Who in the organization needs to make sure that there isn't a disconnect or dissonance between that guiding principle of the customer experience and then sort of somehow buttressing it through the employee experience?
We're finding this is one of the biggest challenges because there isn't a clear-cut owner for the workforce experience. And that's probably a good thing in the long run because there are way too many individual groups, teams, and leaders who must be involved to have one leader as the accountable leader. That said, we're finding a number of organizations achieving great success by at least appointing either an existing function. In many cases, we're finding that happens to be HR, but certainly in some organizations, a different way of having that accountability for orchestrating the experience, meaning to bring together the variety of groups. Those could be HR, IT, real estate, marketing, finance, business leaders for sure, et cetera, to all play their roles inside of that experience. And keeping that end goal, delivering on that end customer experience as the brass ring, as the nonstop North Star, to your point, as I mix metaphors here, it becomes a mode of way of thinking, a different mindset that enterprises are shaping for themselves, and their leaders can model that behavior. I'll share with you one great example of this where in the typical world inside of, say, an airline, you would expect that flight attendants are there, as you always hear on the announcements, for your safety first and to provide service. But one particular major airline recognized that those flight attendants are also the ones who can create the greatest stickiness to customer relationships because they see their top customers in flight where it matters the most. And they've equipped that group of flight attendants with data in the form of a mobile device app that they're able to see who's on board, where they fit in the sort of importance from customers in terms of revenue and other important factors, and provide triggers to those flight attendants and other in-flight staff to help them recognize those customers, to ensure that they're having a great experience. And when things maybe don't go as well as possible, perhaps due to Mother Nature, those flight attendants are there keeping watch of their most important customers. That's a very new kind of construct in a world where the typical job was not one focused on, say, selling to customers. And now, in sort of an unwitting way, those flight attendants are playing a critical role in fostering and advancing those relationships of customers. There's many, many examples like that I think are the outcome of leaders across functions coming together to orchestrate an experience that ultimately is centered around creating a rich customer experience where it's mattering the most.
Yeah, no, the 2 points. One, what Art said is absolutely consistent with the findings of the study we conducted jointly with The Economist, is that there is no clear-cut leader for employee experience today. In fact, both chief human resources officers and CIOs equally indicated that they were on point as the lead for driving that experience. We are beginning to see the emergence of digital employee experience officer that's emerging at some organizations to help drive this coordination that Art's talking about. But the second point to your question around how do we keep employees focused on the customer experience, I think it goes back to your opening question around purpose. Increasingly, as Art indicated, there is a clear demonstration of companies that have clear purpose are performing better, and that's because that purpose tends to be on some business outcome, driving some greater experience or innovation or business outcome for their customers. And if we can ensure that employees have the right tools and information and training, their skill sets in order to deliver that customer experience, they're clearly aligned with it. So I think it all ties very well together.
Yeah, Tim, when I heard Art talking about the flight attendants, it seems to me that there's a whole class of employees that are in that interaction with the customer role. It could be retail, the person on the floor of a clothing seller, or it could be a help desk operator. These are the power users that need to get more data and more help and more inference delivered to them. They might be the perfect example of the user that you're trying to provide a digital workspace to. So let's focus on that workspace What sort of qualities does that workspace need to have, and why are we in a better position when it comes to automation and intelligence than ever before to empower those employees, the ones that are on the front lines interacting with the customer?
So, excellent question. There's really three and an emerging fourth capability that's required for an effective digital workspace. The first is it needs to be unified. We talked about all the complexity and noise that bogs up an employee's day and all the applications they need to navigate. Well, the digital workspace must unify that by giving a single sign-on experience into the workspace to all of their apps and content that an employee needs to be productive and do engaging work, whether they're at the office on the corporate network, whether they're on their tablet at home, or whether they're on their smartphone on a train or a plane. The second part is obviously in this day and age, considering especially those frontline employees that are touching customer information, it needs to be secure. Your apps and content need to be more secure within the workspace than when accessed natively, so that you're dynamically applying security policies and maybe asking for a second layer of authentication based on that employee's behavior. The third part is really around intelligence, right? Bringing things like machine learning and simplified workflows into the workspace to create that consumer-like experience we discussed earlier, where the employee is presented with the right information and the right tasks within the workspace so that they can quickly access those rather than needing to log into an application and go 4 layers deep. I would say the fourth one that's emerging that we're hearing more about is all of that is great, but I have to be sure that those applications, especially for frontline employees that are engaged with customers, are performing at their very best within the workspace, whether that employee is at a corporate office or more likely at a remote retail branch. And so bringing some of the historical infrastructure like networking technology to bear in order to ensure those applications are always on and reliable is really that fourth pillar of what's making new digital workspace strategies emerge in the enterprise.
So, Art, for folks like Tim and I, we are living in this technology world, and we sometimes get lost in the weeds and start talking in acronyms and whatnot. At Deloitte, you're widely regarded as one of the world's #1 HR transformation consultancies. First, tell us a little bit about your consultancy and your HR practice at Deloitte, and then please let us know, is explaining what technology does and is capable of a bigger part of that, taking what Tim and I talk about all the time and, sort of legalese, but techlese, if you will. Is that part of what you're doing? Are you trying to explain the tech to the HR people and then perhaps even the HR to the tech people?
Well, first, thanks for the recognition. We are truly humbled and yet proud to be the world's leading HR transformation firm. And I think by having the opportunity, as we do, to partner with the world's leading enterprises to shape and influence the future of HR, it gives us a really interesting window into exactly what you're describing. And I think a lot of the organizations we work with, the HR leaders and their teams, are increasingly well-versed in the various technologies that are out there. The biggest challenge we find is being able to harness the value of those technologies, find the ones that are going to produce impact at a pace and with cost and return that really is valued by the enterprise overall. And so I think for sure the technology elements are critical enablers. And we recently published a piece on the future of HR as a function that's based on a combination of our research and field experience. And what we've identified is that the future of HR requires a shift in 4 big areas: the mindset, meaning the culture and the behaviors of the HR function; the focus, meaning focusing in on the customers themselves; the lens through which the HR function operates, meaning the operating model and the shift towards a more agile, networked kind of enterprise of an HR function; and then finally enablers, and the enablers being this wide array of technologies from core HR platform technologies to collaboration tools to automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on. And that combination enables HR as a function to really shift into what we're referring to as a world that is exponential. I'll give you one quick example, though, where all this comes together. There's a solution set that we're finding is incredibly powerful inside of driving employee experience that we refer to as creating a unified engagement platform, meaning the blend of all these technologies in a simple-to-navigate experience that empowers the workers across an enterprise and HR to serve them. We, Deloitte, have actually created one of those platforms that's in the market that leads the space called Connect Me, and there are certainly others. And in that, what we're essentially actually finding is that HR leaders are looking for, and their businesses are pulling along with their workers for that simple to navigate, frictionless kind of creating environment where people can get their jobs done and enjoy doing them at the same time using technology to empower them. So I think the premise that you described is spot on, and HR leaders are navigating this complex set of technologies that's out there that are terrific because they're providing advantage for the function that I think continues to lead some of the other technology available that's out there, because a lot of the technology firms are investing heavily in worker-facing technology platforms for exactly the reason we've been chatting about here for the last little while.
Tim, when it comes to that skills gap, it is, if you will, an employee's market. Unemployment rates are very low. The types of skills in demand are hard to find. And so the satisfaction of that top-tier worker is essential. And it seems to me that the better tools you can give them, the more they'll want to work for you. If I were a top-skilled employee, I'd want to go to the place that has the best information, the best bot, that it empowers me in the best way, bringing context, information, speed, and agility within the context of security as well to my fingertips. But that's really difficult to do. So how do we attract and hold this high-skilled, I guess you could call them a connoisseur of intelligence in that high-level use case, perhaps like even the one that Art described? Tell me a little bit about how we can enhance and entice employees by giving them the best intelligence in context types of tools.
Yeah, Dana, I think the first thing, if you think about your top performing employees, they really want to do their most meaningful work. They want to perform at their best, and as a result, they want to eliminate a lot of the noise from their day, as Art mentioned before, that friction, and that friction is not solely technology, but it's often manifests its way through technology due to certain tasks or requirements that we need to do that may not pertain to our core jobs. So last time I checked, I don't think either Art or myself were hired to review and approve expense reports or spend a good chunk of our time, dare I say, approving PTO or even doing full-scale performance reviews. Yet, those types of applications which may not be pertinent to our job or processes that may not be pertinent to our job tend to take up a good part of our time. So if you think about what these digital workspaces do, or if you want to call them digital work platforms, the first phase is removing that noise from your day so that your best performing employees can do their best work. The second phase is really helping, using those same platforms to actually help all employees do better work. And that's through the form of making sure that information is pushed to them that they need that's pertinent to their jobs. And that might be in a salesperson's environment, might be a change in pipeline status, might be a change in a prospect or customer activity, and making sure that they have at their fingertips not only that information, but what to do with it. You should take this action. And what gets very, very exciting about that is you have the opportunity now to actually elevate the skills of every employee. So we talk about a skills gap. One way is to go retrain everybody. Another way is to make sure that you're giving them an unfair advantage within the work platform they're using to guide them through the right process. So a great example is Salesforce productivity. A typical company takes 9 to 12 months to get a salesperson up to full productivity. Average tenure of a salesperson is somewhere around 36 months. So a company's getting a year and a half of productivity out of a salesperson. What if, by eliminating all of that noise, by using this digital work platform to help push the right information, the right tasks, the right actions, the right customer sales pitches to them at the right time, what if you can cut that time to productivity in half? You just think about the real business value that could come from using technology to actually elevate the skill set of the entire workforce rather than bog it down.
Tim, Art had some really great examples. Do you have any examples that will illustrate what you just described? That is to say, ways in which a company has elevated its worker satisfaction and capabilities, reduced the time to productivity for a new onboarding of an employee, for example, as well. Any either named or use case types of examples that show how what you're doing at Citrix has been a big contributor to that?
Yeah, I think there's probably a number of examples, but one that's top of mind right now. So not only when harnessed the right way do these work platforms help improve employee experience, elevate the experience for customers, but also we begin to allow companies to rethink work models in ways they probably haven't since Henry Ford. And the example that comes to mind is eBay. So we're all familiar with eBay, one of the world's largest online digital marketplaces. And like many, many other companies, they have a large customer call center where buyers and sellers call in when they want to ask a question. And these call centers employees have the right information at their fingertips to help get things done. Well, the challenge they were coming up with is this talent gap, this labor shortage, where traditionally they would build a big call center and they would hire a bunch of employees and train them up to staff that call center. But now it's getting harder and harder to do. They're competing with the likes of Amazon and Google and others who are trying to do the same thing. And so they use this technology to break the traditional mold and create a new work model where they're going to where the talent is, the stay-at-home parent in Montana, the retiree in Florida, the gig worker in Boston or New York, and arming them with this digital workspace and pushing the right information and tool set to them, and then ensuring that when you and I call in, we don't know that they're not sitting in a centralized call center, but they're still getting the job done. So these are just one example of how, as we begin to harness and unify this technology, think about how we can change work models. We can create not just a better employee experience, but entirely new ways to work.
Art, it's been historically and traditionally really difficult to measure productivity and then especially to find out what contributes to that productivity. The same, unfortunately, is the case with technology. It's very difficult to measure quantitatively and qualitatively what technology directly does for employee productivity and even overall organizational productivity. Are there ways for us to look to try to measure when we do good human resources that contributes to good employee satisfaction and ultimately customer satisfaction? How do we know when we're doing this right?
I think this is the holy grail in many ways. I mean, you get what you measure, and because this whole space of workforce experience in many ways is a newer discipline. Much like customer experience has been around for a while and gained great traction in measurement. We can measure customer feedback, we can measure net promoter score, and a variety of other indicators, not the least of which may be revenue, for example, or even profitability relative to customer base. We equally are starting to see the emergence of measurement in the workforce experience arena. And at the top line, we can see measurements like measuring workforce engagement. As that rises, likely there's a connection to positive worker experience. We can measure productivity. We can even measure the growth of capabilities within the workforce that are being gained as a result of their, as we like to say, learning in the flow of work to develop their capabilities. I think the path, however, is really important to chart out because it has similarities to those tools and methods and approaches used inside the customer space. We think about it in very simple terms. We need to first look, listen, and understand, so sensing what's happening with the workforce. We need to generate and prioritize different ideas of ways in which the experience for the workforce can be moved. And then we need to iterate, test, refine, and plan the kinds of changes you might prototype, et cetera, that provides you the foundation to measure. And in the workforce experience space, there's a variety of measures that we're starting to see that get down into the granular levels below those top-line measures that I was just sort of mentioning briefly. And what comes to mind for me are things like measuring the user experience for all of the workers. How effective is the product or service that they're being asked to use, and how quickly can they deliver their work? What feedback do we get from workers? So kind of a worker feedback category. And then there's a set of operational measures that can track inputs and outputs from various processes and various portions of the experience. And there's a kind of categorization in those three buckets that really seems to be working well for many of our clients to measure that notion of workforce experience. To your point, no, we got it right. But in the end, as I shared at the beginning, I think it's really critical that organizations are measuring that workforce experience to the ultimate lens, which is how are we doing with our customers? And when that's performing well, chances are pretty good based on the research that we've seen that the connection is there to the employee or the workforce experience.
And Dana, I would say that, as already indicated here, you're talking about employee experience, which is, we've got to be careful that it's not synonymous with just productivity. It is this balance of productivity and employee engagement that ultimately drives the greater business results, customer experience and satisfaction, improved profitability, the things that Art had mentioned before, which were validated in the study we did with the economists as well. But too often, people try to isolate down employee experience as being synonymous with productivity, and it's certainly a key integer into it, but it is not the only one.
Tim, what do you think IT people need to be thinking about differently when it comes to how they view their own success? I mean, it wasn't that long ago where simply the performance of the systems, where all the green lights were on and the networks weren't down, was your level of success. Should IT be elevating how it perceives of itself and therefore how it should rate itself when it's successful within one of these larger endeavors, one of these digital transformation endeavors?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this could be the revitalization of IT, that moving beyond the items that you mentioned, keeping the networks up, keeping the applications performing well, to really driving better business outcomes and results. And those forward-thinking companies that are looking to digitize their business are realizing that it's very hard to ask an employee base to drive a greater digital customer experience without arming them with the right tools, information, and experience in their own right in order to get that done. And, IT can play a very major role here, locking arms in unison with the Chief Human Resources Officer to really move the needle and turn employee experience into a competitive edge, not just for attracting and retaining talent, but ultimately for driving better business results.
Yeah, well, I hope, if anything, this conversation perhaps prompts more opportunity for the human resources leadership and the IT leadership to spend some time together and brainstorm a little bit, find commonality. Before we sign off, just a very quick look to the future. Art, for you, what might be changing soon that will help remove even more friction for employees? Do you think there are either technologies, processes, market forces? What down the pike over the next 3 to 5 years might be an accelerant to removing friction? We've talked about the challenges. Are there any sort of bright spots in your thinking about the future?
Well, yes. I think the future is really bright. I think we're optimistic just by nature and the fact that we see enterprises making terrific, bold moves to embrace their future, as challenging as the future is. And I think one of the biggest opportunities that seems to be shaping is this recognition of the imperative for executives and their teams to operate in a more symphonic way. And when I say that, I mean to really work together to achieve a common set of results, moving away from the historical silos that were emerging from a zeal for efficiency that led to organizations having these various departments, the departments working within themselves and finding a struggle to create integration. I think we're seeing huge unlocks of that in the spirit of creating more cross-functional teams, a more agile way of working, truly operating in this digital age. And so I think one of the biggest things is, as we talked about in one of our recent Human Capital Trends reports, is the idea of driving this symphonic C-suite, which then has a cascading effect for teams across the board inside of enterprises to be working together. And then secondly, I think there is this big recognition now, I mentioned this briefly earlier, but I think this is a good point to double down on it, that enterprises are recognizing the imperative to create meaning in the work that their workers are doing. Increasingly, we're seeing this as a demand. This is not a single generational demand. It's not that the younger generation needs meaning or anything like that fit into stereotypes, but rather a recognition that when we create purpose and meaning for the workers in an enterprise, they are more committed, they are more focused on outcomes as opposed to activities, because they begin to recognize the outcomes linkage to their own personal purpose and meaning for the enterprise and for their work itself. And so I think those two things will continue to emerge and do it on a fairly rapid basis to be able to embrace that need for symphonic operation and symphonic collaboration and the imperative to create meaning and purpose for the workers of an enterprise, all of which will, again, unlock and unleash that capability and that focus on the customer through creating terrific employee or workforce experience.
Tim, last word to you. How do you foresee over the next several years technology evolving to support and engender that symphonic culture that Art just described?
I think, as we talked about before, really we've gotten to this point where employees are asking for a simplification of their environment, a unified access to everything to remove noise from their day so they can do that meaningful, purposeful work that Art talks about. But what's exciting is that same platform can be enabled to elevate the skill sets of all employees, giving them the right information, the right task at the right time so that they can perform at their very best. But what gets me very excited about when you think about the future is technology and a lot of the new thinking that's going on there that Art talks about. I think in the next few years, we're going to see work models, similar to the example I shared about eBay, change in ways that we haven't in the past 100, where the lines between different functions and different organizations, full-time versus part-time workers, begin to evaporate. And instead, we have work models where companies are beginning to organize around pools of talent, where they know who has the right skill sets, the right knowledge base and the like, whether they're a full-time employee or a contractor. And they use technology to pull them together into work groups, no matter where they are in the world, to solve a given problem or produce a given outcome, and then dissolve them very quickly again. So I'm very excited about what we're going to see in the next 5 years ahead.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored BriefingsDirect discussion on how business leaders can enhance and optimize today's employee experience to optimize the customer experience, and then by extension, better support the success of the overall business. And we've learned how those charting the next chapters of human resources and information technology are finding increased common ground to significantly improve the modern employee experience. So join me in extending a big thank you to our guests who've been here with Art Mazur, Principal and Global Human Resources Transformation Practice Leader at Deloitte. Art, thank you so much.
Thank you, and great to chat with you, Dana and Tim.
And we've also been here with Tim Minahan, Executive Vice President of Strategy and Chief Marketing Officer at Citrix. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dana, and thank you, Art. It's been a great conversation.
And a big thank you to our audience as well for joining this BriefingsDirect Intelligent Workspaces discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of Citrix-sponsored BriefingsDirect discussions. Thanks for listening. Please pass this along to your community, and do come back next time.